Welcome to the overview for the Best Practices Guide for Numeracy and the Numeracy Resource Guide. The Numeracy Workgroup has been working in conjunction with the 1.2 strategy team to provide these materials and resources to teachers and teams and administrators. The Best Practices Guide for Numeracy has 5 chapters. Let's dive into Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is Best Practices for Numeracy Instruction. This chapter is divided into 2 sections. The first section is aimed at providing an understanding of the high leverage practices. The second references the 7 effective instructional practices that are identified for teaching math to students with learning disabilities. This section is dedicated to helping teachers understand a universal Tier 1 skill and support for students with disabilities. Section 1 is the universal skills that all special educators need. We have taken out the instructional high leverage practices from the CEDAR model and put them here so teachers can use this as a Tier 1 level of support for students. Section 2 is focused on evidence-based practices, which are skills, techniques, and strategies that are backed by research and content-focused. These recommendations came from What Works Clearinghouse and are aimed at teaching students with disabilities. These 7 recommendations are provided to help us be more targeted for students. It is also a Tier 1 support. You'll notice as you go through these recommendations that each recommendation has an effect size for students with disabilities from the Center on Instruction. Each recommendation gives an overview as well as a link to the High Yield Instructional Strategies chapter. On recommendation 6, we have included John Hattie's effect size for ongoing informative assessment and feedback to teachers. And then on recommendation 8, we've added this recommendation from the Framework for Building Partnerships because we know that partnerships with schools, families, and communities is an important piece of her instruction. We feel that this is an important piece, and so we added it into the Best Practices Guide. Once they're finished with this chapter, where might they go next? They could use the Evidence-Based Practices for Educators, which is a link to the CEDAR Mathematics Innovation Configurations. Starting on page 68 are the configurations. They can be used for a variety of things, one of them being self-assessment. The next section is Assessment and Tools for Guiding Instruction. You can access it from the table of contents. It's also at the bottom of the first chapter. So now that we know the best practices, let's talk about gathering baseline data and ongoing data. So there's an introduction for assessment. There are the P's of assessment, planning, predicting, and progress monitoring, and it gives the teachers some information around that. And then something that teachers and teams really enjoy and can benefit from are the math skills checklists. In this folder, there are checklists from kindergarten to Algebra 2 and even Algebra Essentials, and each checklist takes the Missouri Learning Standards and gives them and buckets them so that teachers can use them for data collection, for progress monitoring, and to show growth. These can also be used to help plan instruction and future units. There's also recommendations for progress monitoring that include FastBridge, AIMS Algebra Progress Monitoring Tool, that quiz, and a variety of other math progress monitoring tools. Also, because we use Goalbook at SSD, we have standards-based assessments in Goalbook that can directly tie to standards-based IEPs and have assessment and content supports. And then finally, we have 60 formative assessments that teachers can use for the area of numeracy. The next section is high-yield instructional strategies. You can access it from the bottom of the assessment and tools, or you can go back to the table of contents. So the 1.2 strategy team gave us the task of whittling down the high-yield instructional strategies to a handful. We used Intervention Central, John Hattie, Marzano, and the Effective Practice Guides from What Works to create the high-yield instructional strategies that we support for numeracy. Planning and Development offers professional learning for each of these throughout the year. Each strategy has the name and the source. It also links to skill areas. So when teachers have students who are struggling in a particular area, they can go back and reference the strategy that they might try. There's also a definition of what it is, why it works, that includes the effect size, and then what it does, and what might be some examples, activities, tools, and resources. So it's important to note that when we use high-yield instructional strategies, we are using them by teaching them with the high leverage practices. So we don't want to lose sight of the high leverage practices we learned in Chapter 1. They will be used to teach these high-yield instructional strategies. If you see something you like, take a look on KickUp. We do provide professional learning for all of the strategies. At the end of the section, you may access the next section, or you can go back to the table of contents. The next section is numeracy for students assessed on essential skills or essential elements. This gives a little bit of research at the top, and then there are links to the developmental continuum of numeracy skills from birth to high school, 6 approaches to numeracy instruction for students with significant disabilities, story-based math problems, and then a link of resources, and then the references used to create this section. This is a great place to go when you have teachers who support kids who are assessed on essential elements. The next and final section is technology to enhance numeracy instruction. The purpose of this chapter is to provide teachers with resources that support the planning and delivery of math instruction, as well as resources for students to practice. This section is divided into several subsections, the first being resources to guide decisions about integrating technology and the types of technology. So there are some links to ISTE, the University of Michigan, and Instructional Innovations for why teachers might want to use technology with mathematics. The next section is resources designed for teachers and students. There are resources from National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics, the Virtual Manipulative Library, among others. Some of my favorites are GeoGebra and Desmos, used with secondary students. The next section is technology resources for teachers. So we've got classroom resources, explicit instruction, among others. The last mini section underneath here is some website tutorials, courses, and ways that teachers can enhance their learning for mathematics. The National Center for Intensive Instruction has a math course that they can take. There are a couple of them. And the IRIS Center has a high-quality math instruction module, and then the Math Assessments Project has resources as well. So if teachers or data teams would like to learn a little bit more about math and go deeper, this would be a great resource. The next piece that we're going to look at is the Math Resource Guide. This guide was created to help teachers, teams, and administrators make decisions about interventions that are used in mathematics when the Tier 1 supports are not working. These programs were selected to be trained and supported by the SSD Numeracy Focus Team. We do train on all of these programs, so please check KickUp to sign up for any of these trainings. Each of the programs or interventions are organized by a little bit of information at the top, the level of intervention, so whether it is a replacement or supplemental, sometimes they're both, what kind of focus, whether it's computation or concepts, gives you some information about the publisher, the cost, the grade levels that the content would cover, the group size, the length of the lesson, the types of materials needed, the types of training required, and of course the research. Each of the programs that we train on requires fidelity checks and coaching to obtain competency and maintain integrity of the program to achieve maximum student outcomes. Some of these programs can become quite pricey, and so we want to ensure that what we are doing is making an impact on kids. And one of those pieces is making sure that we're doing it correctly. If you have questions or would like to look at samples of any of these programs, please contact your Numeracy Focus Team representative or facilitator in your zone. You can contact Katie Purcell for Zone 3, Tamara Timko for Zone 2, and Jessica Spencer for Zone 1. You can contact Molly Bolton for any of the schools. When you're thinking about purchasing math interventions, we highly recommend that you use the intervention selection tool. This tool, along with the resource guide, will help decide if we have enough time for this intervention, if this is the right intervention, so that we can target our intervention to the need of the student. If you have questions, you are welcome to contact me, Angie Ricidi, with any questions about the Math Resource Guide, or you can contact Molly or any of the math facilitators. Thank you for your time, and I hope this has been helpful.